Hi guys, it's Rishi. I'm back again. This is a late upload in the comic week, but I just wanted to do the same thing I did last week, run down the books I've been reading and the books I've been pulling, and basically recommend what's been good recently. Okay, so first book first, we have Action Comics 1070, with the main interior done by Mark Waid writing and Clayton Henry art. This is still in the Phantoms arc, currently 7 issues in. The next arc, the next good jumping on point is going to be in January at issue 1082, and this specific story will be collected in a trade paperback July of next year. In general, I think this arc has been a bit of a mixed bag for me. I like some of the interesting stuff that's being played with in terms of retcons about the Phantom Zone and its original purpose. And I do think that it's been fun to reintroduce Mon-El as a character who I really only knew through adaptations. But the pacing of this arc has been really difficult for me. I've just seen this arc as I don't think it needs to be 12 issues. I think if you cut out some of the stuff in this run, you could probably tell it in 8. The Connor and Keenan story that I mentioned last week, it's enjoyable, it's fun, and it wraps up in this issue, but it messes with the pacing. It really messes with the pacing in a way that would make sense to not be there. Another thing, what looks like the main bad guy of the arc has been dealt with here, 7 issues into a 12-issue arc, and I didn't really feel that satisfying, if I'm being honest. I don't know. Mark Waid is obviously a legend. Mark Waid obviously deserves his flowers. I just don't know if this is doing it for me. Now, obviously, as well as the main work in the book, there is also a backup written by Mariko Tamaki and art by Megan Hetrick. And yeah, I was struggling to find purchase, how to get my foothold in this story, mainly just because of the fact that it's short bursts every week. And I think I've made up my mind. I think I really like it, especially this week with the introduction of 2 characters who have really, really cool character design. I really like it. It makes me wonder why this backup isn't its own book. I think it should be. I think it's very much weighed down by the idea of only having the space of a backup. And Mariko Tamaki, she's done the mains for Action Comics. She's written a lot of really good stuff, and I can't imagine why DC wouldn't have faith in her to be running a Supergirl solo story. Another thing I will say, the way that this book portrays certain events in Supergirl's past, these are scenes from Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, which, to my knowledge, was never officially considered canon. It's always been canon adjacent, canon-ish. I guess that DC is now making that story canon, which makes sense considering it got a bunch of critical acclaim and they are making a movie about it. But yeah, I think the backup is solid, and I think it should be its own ongoing book. Okay, so the next book I have on my pull list is a little Christmas present from DC. This is Batman Santa Claus The Silent Night Returns. Just just a very funny idea for a crossover comic. This isn't the first Batman Santa Claus comic. In fact, last year there was a Batman slash Santa Claus The Silent Night book. This has the same writer, Jeff Parker, but it's a different artist. This year it's Lucas Kettner. And there are some references to that story last year, but it is mainly its own thing, and anything you need to know can easily be gleaned from the little recaps you hear here and there. Now, the reason it looks like this glorious thing, is because I got a wrapped holiday surprise variant and opened it to find this cute little Dan Hip cover, which if you can't smell this. I can smell this, but you can't. You rub it. Smells like pine needles. How cool is that? I am incredibly pro gimmick. Want to make that clear right now in the early days of this channel. I am pro gimmick cover, and this is incredibly fun in terms of art and incredibly cool in terms of the fun gimmick it's got going for it. But yeah, it's in terms of what's going on. Uh, it, it's a misnomer because it's more of a Robin and Zatanna Santa Claus team up with some Justice League story being told inside. Interestingly, there's a team up between Irie West, Wally West's daughter, and Damian Wayne, and I guess I think they had shared a couple of panels in Dark Crisis as well. But yeah, generally I had never thought of them as a team up, but considering that we currently have to deal with an aged up John Kent, I'm so sorry. I do think that's a fun age appropriate character to have Damien hanging out around. I I like that team up. I'd like to see that continued and stuff. But yeah, this is generally very like sweet and enjoyable, but unlike last year, which did feel like pure sugar plums, this has a bit more, and it might just be the art, but it has a bit more of a mystery slash action adventure vibe than last year, which felt like a lot more like what if we had all of the heroes of the DC universe interacting with Santa Claus and Santa Claus mythos. This feels like it's telling like a story that's got world building about a character called the Silent Knight. But I like it. I really do. I recommend it as a cozy Christmas read. There's clearly effort has been put into this book, and I've had fun with this first issue. Check it out. Okay, so next up by DC, I have Black Canary, the best of the best. The writing is by Tom King, and the interior art is by Ryan Sook. A different artist did the cover, but this is very easy to pick up. This is somewhere you can start reading Black Canary. It seems like it's going to be a mini series that will specifically go over her history and her time as and Dinah Lance's time as Black Canary, whilst also including a bunch of the fantastic fighters that have been part of her close circle and cast of interactions throughout the years. The interesting thing about this book is that it is a wrestling book. Now, I'm not someone who knows a lot about wrestling, but having read this book, I think I could get into wrestling. Is this what wrestling is like? Um, if you're a wrestling fan who has read this book, let me know, because this is what wrestling is. I could get into wrestling. This kind of rocks. Like, the art is great, especially the stuff that's happening inside the ring. Like, you've got, like, the fluidity of the fight moves between Lady Shiva and Black Canary. It's really cool. I have one critique, and it wouldn't be that important, except it feels kind of big given everything. I don't like Lady Shiva being this pale. I think Lady Shiva should maybe be darker. I've seen her portrayed as darker in multiple things, and I can't wrap my head around why they would be choosing to depict her lighter than she's ever usually shown in comics, which is such a shame because this looks so cool. One of the things I really like is how you can really hear the wrestling commentators in your head. And Lady Shiva comes out swinging and swinging down hard. Oh my heart! I felt that hook from here and it stung like the dickens. We will begin with blood, folks, and she follows with a leg to the body. Brutal, brutal, brutal! Just, it's fun. It's fun to read. I'm thinking about getting into wrestling after this, and I think you should definitely get into this book, because this is so much fun. It's, it's great. It's great. Okay, so the next book I want to talk about is Detective Comics 1091 by Tom Taylor with the interior art by Mikhail Janin. This is one issue into a new run. The arc started at 1090, so that's probably where you'd want to start if you want to pick up. And before I say anything else about this book, I do think the art is really good. This great Superman Batman interaction has been. It looks very nice. But generally, I'm a bit cold on this run. Now we're a couple issues in. I think it's fine, but it's not speaking to me. I get what Tom Taylor is trying to do with the guilt that Bruce is carrying about his position being afforded these fantastic privileges for being a billionaire, but it ends up coming down very neoliberal, trickle down, like the way that Superman says, "Oh, if you're benefiting from this technology, then I'm sure you'll find a way to get it to everyone else." I don't know if it works. I don't know if it works. And in the same way, the stuff with Bruce aging, it clearly wants to talk about Bruce aging, and that would be something interesting to talk about. Except Bruce never ages. That's a very prominent thing about him. That will always be undercut by the fact that Bruce will always snap back to a nebulous prime age where he was at his most effective because DC doesn't want to tell a bunch of stories about Bruce being past his prime, Bruce retiring, and all of that. You want to keep telling Batman stories that feel evergreen. You're going to keep snapping him back. And it's difficult to get out of that. I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to pick up the next issue. I'll have a look. Probably the cover will be something in terms of convincing me. But I don't know. I don't know about this arc. It's coming off such a strong arc as well. That Ram V Detective Comics arc that was just comics as opera, that was glorious and beautiful, and those covers, each one could be its own poster. It was, I mean, not to compare and contrast, but I'm not feeling this one nearly as much as I felt the last one. I We will see. We really will see. Okay, so next up from DC, we have The Flash, issue 15, written by Cy Spurrier, interior art by Vasco Georgiev, I believe it's pronounced, as well as this very cool cover by Mike Del Mundo. This cover, this pinball-inspired cover is so good. I believe they are going to be using it for the trade paperback cover, and I get it. This is great. But yeah, this is the second issue after all in. The last good starting point would be issue 14, but if you want to start the Spurrier run from the beginning, you'd be good to pick up the trade paperbacks, The Flash, Strange Attractors. The other thing as well is that this carries some consequence of the absolute power story. The fallout of that has led to The Flash gaining some new power, but I also think that it pretty much well covers it in here, so you don't need to be worried about having missed any of that stuff. In general, I really like the exploration this run has done of the West family. It's fleshed out Jay in some new ways and given him some cool powers. It's fleshed out Irie in some new ways and given her some cool personality stuff. Even Wade, who is the recent baby who is 16 issues old. There's some interesting stuff going on with Wade, and I think it's phenomenal that they've managed to do that with a 16-issue-old baby. That baby is about a year and a half in real time old. I think this run, actually, I mentioned Strange Attractors before. I think this run started in a pretty dour place. It was fascinating, but it was a little bit sad and a little bit melancholy. Sorry. It was a little bit sad and a little bit melancholy. But it really feels like Spurrier has done the work to earn his way to a happier status quo, a more fun status quo. I wouldn't say it's where Jeremy Adams' run left off, but it's a very happy medium between doing some interesting stuff with the Speed Force and also having your fun West family dynamics. I think that is really fun and good. It reminds me, this is humble brag, there's nothing to do with this comic, but I met Cy Spurrier a couple of years back at Thought Bubble Comic Con, and he mentioned about Nightcrawler, how everyone who wants to write Nightcrawler wants to write these fun swashbuckling stories, but in order to do that, you need to wrestle with the copious amounts of religious guilt the character has, and you need to have him get through it in order to tell those fun stories. And the reason I bring that up is because it feels like they've done a similar thing with the sort of cosmic horror around The Flash. When you really think about it, Simon Spurrier worked through that cosmic horror in order to give us a fun West Family Flash run. And And I think that you really cannot put a price on the amount of setup and work he did on telling a couple less light-hearted stories so that he could tell these light-hearted stories in a way that felt like they meant something. I'm generally a very big fan of Cy Spurrier's work, especially his Hellblazer work. I love his Hellblazer work. I love everything he's done with Nightcrawler. I'm really liking his Flash run. I'm going to keep picking it up. I reckon you should too. Okay, so next up from DC, Green Arrow issue 18, and let me tell you, this is the perfect place to jump on if you're someone who wants to get into Green Arrow. This is a new creative team, this is a new arc, this is exactly where you should be jumping on. I know All In was last issue, but that issue was a final for the previous arc. This is where you step on for Green Arrow, and let me tell you, his new costume is cool as hell. Like, this issue is good, and the art is very dark. Like, at some points, I look at this and I'm like, Ollie, are you impinging on Batman's territory? Is that what you're trying to do here? But I like it, and the other thing as well is I liked the Williamson run. I really did like the Williamson run. I think there was a lot of fun stuff there. This is a more interesting street level story as opposed to what we just had, which was a pretty deep cut, lore heavy, continuity laden run, which I get because Williamson wanted to reunite an Arrow family. He wanted to put every character back on the table, but as a result, it felt very ungrounded. It felt very comics about comics. I liked the run, but like I said, comics about comics, eventually you sort of lose that grounding. And this issue, the grounding is back in such a big way. And something that I think Williamson wanted to touch on, but never really got to, is the inherent politics of Oliver Queen. Oliver Queen is this big leftist in the DC universe. He's always talking about capitalism and such. And yeah, he's right. Am I gonna cut this? Who knows if I'm gonna cut this? But Oliver Queen is an inherently political character, and so many of his best stories are inherently political stories. So I love the fact that this issue has taken us back to inherently political. Oliver Queen will throw hands with a Republican congressman levels of Green Arrow storytelling. I like that a lot. If you want to get into Green Arrow, if you want to properly get into Green Arrow, if you want to start at a place where it feels like you can be starting from the beginning, this is where you are. Issue 18, Chris Condon and Montos. Speaking of jumping on points, this is spinning out of Absolute Power. This is spinning out of the All-In special. This is what I have titled the video after, if I'm doing this right. Ladies and gentlemen, after 2 years, the Justice League is back. This is an Andy Kubert cover. This is a Daniel Sampere cover. The reason I'm putting this one down is so I can show you this. This is a wraparound cover, and it's cool as hell. Like I said, spinning out of All In, spinning out of Absolute Power, but it recaps well enough that you should be able to just pick this up and start reading. We are so back. I mentioned previously about this new dynamic status quo that we're doing with the Justice League, wherein basically every qualified hero has been drafted as a recruit and everyone is in there. And I like it. I like this new dynamic status quo. I hope it leads to a ton more characters getting cool moments. The two big characters who get cool moments, who are often probably overshadowed in everything, are Star Sapphire, this is Carol Ferris, and Airwave, who I don't actually know that much about, but seems like he's going to be a very big player. I'm liking this book. This is Mark Waid and Dan Mora, the same creative team from the first few arcs of World's Finest. This creative team worked together on Shazam. This creative team keeps working together, if I'm being perfectly honest. And wonderful as well because Dan Mora is getting to draw so many DC superhero characters, and I like that. I like Dan Mora art. I like when he draws characters. So allowing him to draw characters, that's a slam dunk in my book. And this is the allowing him to draw characters book. The question pops up in here for like a panel. It's great. It's fantastic. I'm liking this. I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes because there is so much interesting stuff that can be done with this current Justice League dynamic. I can't wait to see where it goes. And if you want to pick up a just DC in the blood DC book going on in the thick of it right now, if you want to know everything that's going on, this is what I would recommend you pick up right now. This first issue of Justice League. Keep a lookout for it. Okay, next on the pull list, we have the new Nightwing run, written by Dan Waters and art by Dexter Soy. This is a Dexter Soy cover, and I also got a Dan Panosian cover, which I really like, and I'm going to hold because it is the cardstock cover, and I worry about colors running. I'm really feeling this book, like in terms of the action, in terms of the art, in terms of the writing. I'm feeling this book. Like at this point, I think Nightwing is in an interesting period of redefinition. We've just had a very critically acclaimed, very beloved Nightwing run, but I think some people would agree with me, sanded off the edges that the character can sometimes have, that the character I think should sometimes have. After previous run, making him a very agreeable, very kind, very unobjectable person, I like to see him as fallible and imperfect again. There's a grit here that I like. I really like that I can read this book, see Nightwing make a decision and say, probably shouldn't have done that. I like that. There's some interesting stuff in here. I'm liking this gang war stuff. I'm looking forward to seeing how it goes. I really hope that this run manages to stay on the quality it's been on because currently I'm nothing but excited about where this run is going. I like that. I recommend it. Start at issue 119 if you want to step on Nightwing right now. Next up, we have the Man of Steel himself, Superman, issue 20. I've got this Dan Mora cover as well as this Chris Samney cover that I'm going to hold up because, like I said, I like holding up the cardstocks. It means I'm not as scared of the colors running. This is, like I said, issue 20. If you want to step on this run, no better place than issue 19. I'm liking this book. It started telling its post all in story, and that has included making a big thing of Doomsday in some ways that I do find interesting because I never usually find Doomsday to be a very interesting character. The take this book has had on Doomsday and the new things it's created are good. I like it. I definitely think that it's the best things that's been done with the character in a very long time. It's also spinning out of All In, and something that's happened from that is that Lois currently has powers, and I'm liking this new dynamic. I am a person who prefers Lois to be Lois Lane. I really enjoy her as a character. She is one of my favorites in comics generally, and I do generally prefer her to be her own character. Knowing that this is going to be a very temporary state of affairs, that I cannot see this lasting even 10 issues, I like what we've got currently. There's a point here where, dealing with a wound, Clark is using his freeze breath on a wound, and I'm just like, yeah, man, of course you would. She can take that now. It's great. I love this bit of dynamic, and I would love to see it carry on till after she has the powers, even past after she has the powers, when she does remember what it's like. It feels like a fun throwback to the issue where Lois gets superpowers in All-Star Superman by Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely. I'm liking this book. I also think that it's making some big promises that, like, if you've read it, you'll see there are some big promises being made in this book. If you've not yet, pick it up. I'm looking forward to seeing if it delivers on the promises it makes in terms of the stakes of this story. And finally, for my DC pulls this week, we have Absolute Wonder Woman issue 2. I actually literally want to point this out because I didn't notice it until right before I started filming this bit. She seems to be fighting on Perez Street, Perez Avenue, Perez Boulevard. It's a fun reference to George Perez, who is one of the great Wonder Woman writers and artists. It's fantastic. But in general, it's a strong issue. It's another strong issue. We get the introduction of Absolute Steve Trevor, who is sweet. He's everything you want him to be. He's Steve Trevor. It's nice. It's interesting. There's a lot of cool stuff. Like we get to understand more about her lasso, which it's a lasso of Nemesis. It seems to be less of the lasso of truth and more like Ghost Rider's penance stare, in that it redirects the pain that you have brought upon others back upon you, and it's made out of the last basilisk. It's just all sick as hell. It's cool. They also have a throwaway line that Diana is able to communicate with her undead Pegasus because of the fact that she can actually communicate with all animals, even the dead ones. And yeah, man. Yeah, man. This is good. This is good. Another thing that I've written down is that there's a very groovy and atypical panel composition looking at this book. Like, you see pages like this, and then you see pages like, and you can also see that the panel borders are in red, which works with her Nemesis lasso. It works with the color that it is. It's good. It's really good. It's another really strong chapter in the Ultimate Universe. I am really liking all of the Ultimate Universe books that are currently coming out. We're only one issue into Superman, but Batman's pretty strong, and this is really strong. I'm liking a lot of the stuff they're doing with Wonder Woman lore. I talked last week about the fact that I am a recent convert to the Church of Diana of Themyscira. I'm liking this book. I'm looking forward to the next stuff they've got coming up for the Absolute Universe as well. Obviously, we know Jeff Lemire is going to be on Absolute Flash. We've got, I think Denny's Camp is going to be on Absolute Martian Manhunter. Absolute Green Lantern is going to be written by Al Ewing. There's a lot of real fun stuff coming up in the Absolute Universe, and I'm really looking forward to it. I'm wondering if anyone has read the All In special, which is going to be the first book to reference the Booster Gold of it all. Like, we know he's somewhere in the Absolute Universe, but we don't know where, and wherever he is probably going to be the point where we find out when the Prime Universe is actually going to interact. He is very much the America Chavez of this universe. I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes. Absolute's been going from strength to strength, and I'm glad I get to talk about it. Okay, so next up, I have my first pulled issue from Marvel this week. We have Iron Man issue 2, written by Spencer Ackerman, art by Julius Ota, and this is the second issue. Like I said, you should start at issue 1 if you want to get onto this run, and I think you should. I really do. Like, this is a boardroom book. This is a book that really flourishes and thrives when Tony is sitting across the table from another character and talking to him about the ongoings of Stark Industries. And there's a lot of boardroom talk, there's a lot of corporate espionage. This run has a lot to say about profit maximizing behaviors of capitalist companies, and it doesn't surprise me at all considering the writer is Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Spencer Ackerman. I will be talking about him later in the books that I've read this week. But yeah, this is a good book. This is a book that you read for the words and you stay for the art. And the art is great as well. There's a really good, interesting nightmare scene. I love a nightmare scene. I love when comics show you something they could do better in their medium than any version of live action could do. And this is horrifying. You can't do this in live action. It's good. It's really good. I'm a look at this. Look at the Ben-Day dots. I'm misusing that. I'm definitely misusing that. But look at this. Like, there's a really cool, horrifying, evocative nightmare scene that uses some interesting art quirks in order to throw back to earlier times in Tony's chronology. And like I said, the art, I will say, this is a bit of a spoiler. Skip forward 20 seconds. I'm going to say 20 seconds if you don't want to see the spoiler, but it was also on all of the solicits and it's everything. I've literally just written the words, ha, fuck yeah. Iron Man wielding a huge ass clockwork buster sword. Cool as hell. And yeah, I stand by that. I absolutely stand by that. Iron Man sure is wielding a huge ass clockwork buster sword, and it is cool as hell. It's it's great. It's a really enjoyable. I'm liking this run, to be honest. I have a history of bouncing off Iron Man, and last time that was the worst because he was actively involved in X-Men Krakoa stuff. But I'm liking this run, and I am going to keep picking it up. I'm going to keep it as part of my pull list because I'm liking it. I'm reading it. I'm enjoying it. I think you should read it and enjoy it too. If you like reading the words in comics, it's a big one because the dialogue feels very natural. I like it a lot. You should check it out. Okay, so the final book I want to talk about from Marvel is Uncanny X-Men issue 6, written by Gail Simone, art by Javier Garron. This is issue 6, so you're best off starting at issue 1, or the trade paperback that's coming out in April, Red Wave, is going to collect up to this issue. So that would also be another good place to start. This is the X-Men book that is following Rogue, Gambit, Nightcrawler, Wolverine, and Jubilee, all hiding out in Louisiana, rallying after the fall of Krakoa. It also features, as you can see on the cover, a new group of young mutants. I'm being very careful to not call them new mutants. But yes, we have Jitter, Ransom, Deathstream, and Calico. And this issue, as you can probably see from the cover, is a first day at a new school issue with, bullies and nervousness and tropes and all of that. I think these kids are fine. They're interesting enough. Some of them have very interesting powers, but I don't think I've gotten to the heart of them yet, as opposed to, like, for example, Bronze Axo and Melee from Exceptional X-Men, who I think I understand a bit better. But yeah, spoilers, this issue ends up on a cliffhanger because of the fact that it's going to lead into the raid on Grimalkin, which is a 4-part crossover. The next 2 issues of Adjectiveless X-Men and the next 2 issues of Uncanny are both going to be dedicated to both of those teams storming Grimalkin Prison, which was once the Professor Xavier's Institute for Gifted and Talented Mutants. But they are storming it for different reasons with different ideologies, and they're both trying to define what the X-Men means in the wake of the Krakoan era. Now, I ended up writing a paragraph about this, and I'm gonna summarize it. I think it's good. I like this book. I'm probably gonna keep picking up this book, but I can't shake the feeling that X books have been less inspiring since the fall of Krakoa. I genuinely cannot shake the feeling that Marvel was finally on the verge of creating and defining mutant culture outside of the mutant metaphor and the struggle. But the fall of X, the end of Krakoa, and this new From the Ashes era, it just feels like such a disappointing reset to a familiar status quo. Like, I understand that when something huge like Krakoa happens, it's not actually going to last. Like, no one thought Krakoa was everything that X-Men was from now on. But it's more than that. It feels like these new X-Men stories, this new X-Men era, has no interest in looking at the ideas of the last era. I feel like it shouldn't be too much to ask for an ongoing narrative to want to discuss and inspect the ideas of the era that came before it. Like, should it not exist in conversation with Krakoa? I From the Ashes feels like a fun retro throwback, but it never wants to talk about the things that have been thrown away. Like what is it to be a mutant without struggle? Does Kurt still believe in the spark? He spent so much time setting up a religious practice and a way of life, and he'll never talk about it ever again, it feels like. Jubilee has a son. Where is Shogo? Is he still a dragon in Otherworld? Or is he somewhere else? There's so much from the last era that feels like it's just been thrown away, and I find that heartbreaking because I started picking up and reading X-Men books on Krakoa. Like, you'll see the majority of my books, X-Men wise, on my wall. The majority of ones that come from the same era are all Krakoa centric. And I do think that From the Ashes feels like a fun retro throwback. It's exactly where X-Men 97 is placed in terms of mutantdom and humanity. But it's a step back. I really need them to find a way forward because I don't want the entirety of mutant kind to end up like 616 Spider Man, constantly in a cycle of regression and growth just for regression and then regrowth and then regret. It's I want to feel like my stories about mutantdom are going somewhere, and I think that isn't too much to ask. I will say, before I carry on to what I've been reading recreationally this week, I don't have any independents on my pull list for this week, so none of my pulls are from Image, Boom, Dark Horse. I know that Void Rivals has come out this week, but I'm very much trade waiting for that series, as I am for most of the Energon universe, with the exception of G.I. Joe. But yeah, I am aware that Void Rivals came out this week. I'll let you know when I finished reading the second trade, which I picked up a bit ago, but I'll let you know. Okay, so on to what I am currently reading. First thing I want to talk about, Waller vs. Wildstorm from 2023. This was written by Spencer Ackerman, and the interior art has been done by Evan Narcisse. I'm going to start this right off the bat by saying I know a lot about Lois Lane. I know a good amount about Amanda Waller. I know very little about the Wildstorm universe. But I didn't feel like I was lost at any point during this book, which tells me you don't need to know much about the Wildstorm universe in order to get it. This was written by, I mentioned him before, Spencer Ackerman, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, and oh my god, it shows. It shows in the depth of this book, the amazing like nuance underneath it. I will also say, this is speculation. This is entirely speculation. Spencer, if you're watching this, I sorry if I'm wrong, but you can kind of tell that Spencer Ackerman is a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, considering the role that Lois Lane plays in this book. He clearly has a love for this character, which is good. That's a sign of good character. But yeah, this isn't really a superhero book, despite the fact that it's very clearly set in the DC universe. It's more of a book about imperialism and the systemic prioritization of capital, but with superpowered people involved and in the story. The nuance in this book is amazing. You will come out of this book not really being able to say who was in the right, who was in the wrong. It's really good. It's fantastic, and I will amplify anything that's got Lois Lane in it. But I recommend it if any of the stuff that I have said has got you interested, I recommend reading it. It's really good. It's a self-contained book. It was originally released as 4 issues, I believe, but it's all collected in one hardback. The other thing I want to say, the depiction of Amanda Waller is really interesting in it because I think it hits the version of Amanda Waller I feel like I understand and see the most in the character. Because this is me using this interesting book to talk about something I've noticed. I have noticed Amanda Waller go through a process very much opposite to that of, for example, Magneto or Poison Ivy, in that a character who was created to stand for something has fallen victim to the muddying of that thing in the eyes of future generations. Poison Ivy is obviously an eco-terrorist, and it's difficult to have Batman fight her now, so she has essentially been transitioned from villain to anti-hero. Obviously, you have Max Eisenhardt, Magneto, who was originally a very two-dimensional villain, but throughout the years, through the work of writers like Chris Claremont, was given a lot of depth and now exists more as a freedom fighter for mutant kind. And it's fascinating how that transition has happened. Amanda Waller, I find to be somewhat the opposite. She was a government liaison who was ruthless but generally altruistic. She was working on their side. Things like the Suicide Squad tended to be seen more as difficult morality decisions to achieve the correct outcome than objectively immoral. Especially if you look at stories like Absolute Power, you will notice the morality of Amanda Waller has degraded, making her a very different character now. And I can't help but feel like that has something to do with the trust that has been degraded in the American government. I think in the way that she represented the intelligence services, she still represents the intelligence services. We just see them as very different. This isn't to do with this book. This is generally more a conversation I wanted to have about Amanda Waller, Poison Ivy, Max Eisenhardt, and Charles Xavier. It's all around there. It's all interesting conversations about comics. So let me know if you want me to speak about this more. I do have a ton to say about this, but yeah, I absolutely recommend Waller versus Wildstorm. Check it out. Okay, so next book, and this is actually one that I said I would read last week. I'm glad that I was able to, because this is John Ostrander's Spectre, Crime and Punishments. If you look at this. Oh, isn't it gorgeous? If you look, you can see the skeleton of the Spectre running through the print of his body. It's amazing, man. This book, okay, so I'm going to do the thing I say first. This works without prior knowledge or content. It tells you an origin story within this book. You should read this. Second thing I want to say about this book, 7 pages into it, I started giggling because I could see how cool the imagery was, see how cool the art was, and I was immediately so in, so on board for this book. It looks so good. It looks so cool. And the writing as well. John Ostrander has written an introduction to this book, and he talks about the stuff that people like about the Spectre. And you can tell he gets it, because this is simpatico with every other version of the Spectre I have seen or read, and you can tell that is emblematic of the effect he's had on the character. I'll also say, Madame Xanadu appears in this book, and I found that interesting and cool because it felt like a tour of the parts of DC Magic I don't know that much about. Like, I'm a big John Constantine fan. I've made my thoughts on Zatanna very clear. I love her to bits. But the Spectre is so much more cosmic. I don't know much about him, and I've never had the opportunity to explore Madame Xanadu that much. So it's cool to see her in this. This book is so good. I recommend it. I I don't think I could find it on Amazon. Have a look online see if you can find this. I can tell you there's definitely one copy in the Notting Hill Book Exchange in London because I got one of two. Race there. See if you can get it. If you read it, you'll see it's worth it. It it's also really interesting. This book is from 1993. It was written by John Ostrander, and the art is by Tom Mandrake. And it's very bold in a way that I don't feel like a lot of comics currently are now. Like, it tells the stories of some AIDS victims, but in 1993, that was during the crisis. I feel like that's so bold a stance. It reminds me of I've recently been reading Mike Grell's Green Arrow run, and the editor of that book, Mike Gold, is mentioned in the foreword in a conversation that Ostrander had with him. So I can feel like I can feel connections between these books. I think it's interesting and fun. I really like this book, and this is only the first 4 issues of this book. I do want to read the rest of the John Ostrander Spectre run, so I'm going to as soon as I can afford DC Infinite. I this isn't a call to action. I don't have anywhere you can send money currently, but like as soon as I can buy DC Infinite, I'm going to, and I'm going to read the rest of this run because Jesus fucking Christ, it's so good. The other thing I want to say, it's insane that it's been 21 years since we've had a Spectre solo series, right? Like, I was writing my notes and I was like, there's absolutely a story to be told about the rise of fascism under the mask, the guise of religious overreach, considering the Spectre is the living embodiment of God's vengeance, and he would obviously take issue with being weaponized in ways that God would not approve of, especially in America. Now, I'm not making my political beliefs a secret. There's a story there. I'd find it fascinating. I absolutely think it could be told, and this is a character to tell it with. I think we'd benefit from a couple more Spectre stories, not because of anything else, because it would be interesting, and if it was written like this, it would be really, really good. Okay, and the final book I want to talk about today is an independent book that I've currently been reading recently. Haha, Sad Clown Stories. Written by W. Maxwell Prince and drawn by multiple artists. This is from 2021. This is completely original. There's no prior information needed. I believe there is somewhat a crossover with W. Maxwell Prince's other series, Ice Cream Man, but it's definitely low key enough that you don't need to have read it to read this. This is a collection of sad clown stories with the same writer and different artists, like very much the opposite of the Silver Coin anthology that Image put out, which was the same artist but different writers. There might be some small connective tissue from issue to issue, as far as I was able to find, but they can all be read as standalone. Like I said, W. Maxwell Prince is probably best known for Ice Cream Man, which is his horror anthology, but I do want to make a big difference here. This is not a horror anthology. These are not scary clown stories. These are sad clown stories. This isn't horror. I mean, there are some like worrying moments or surprising moments, but this is more human interest, the loose clown theme, than it is horror of any kind. Think less like Pennywise or Comics the Joker and more Joaquin Phoenix, very sad the Joker. Is that going to help my SEO? Is that going to help my search engine optimization? It's like Joaquin Phoenix Joker, where like clowning is a tough gig. It's not always easy to make ends meet. There are 6 stories in this book. I'm not going to talk about all of them because I'm not a substitute for this book. I definitely recommend you read it. It's very good. My personal favorite was the second story, Rudolph on the Road to Funville. although I think that's somewhat biased because I don't think Zoe Thorogood has ever done anything less than perfect in her life, and the art on this issue is no exception. Her art is just so expressive of the human emotion on the characters' faces, even though they're like painted faces. You can, it's so heartbreaking and fascinating about like the nature of people, who we are underneath, who we are beneath the skin, beneath the makeup. It's good. It's I recommend this book. But yeah, that is my last recommendation for this week. If you've got anything you want me to talk about, if you've got any stories that you've heard of that you'd love to hear more about, if you want to know any reading guides for characters, if you want to get into comics, I would love to help you with that. So, any questions you have to ask me about anything, leave a comment below and I will absolutely let you know. Thank you.